Gus, how are you doing?
I have some thrilling news. I think I found a cure for cancer.
You created a cure for cancer from dog DNA.
It's perfectly safe.
Who found the body?
He's over there.
How could they kill Katie?
That's exactly what we're trying to find out.
Matt, you've got to help me!
Ten years ago today, on July 17th, 2006, I released my Brickfilm Beast. Yep, it is 10 years old today. That is crazy to me. And despite all those years, it is still my most popular video on my channel, beating out other films such as 30 Years, The Story of the Minifigure, and all my recent stuff by a mile. So for its 10-year anniversary, I wanted to show you guys some never-before-seen footage of original scenes that I decided to cut as I was making the film. I'll also talk about the script a bit and just discuss how different the original script is from the final film, and wrap it up with some final thoughts about just, I don't know, what I think about Beast. So, let's get right into it. So for our first deleted shot, not scene, just a shot, is when the crime scene investigators show up and examine the crime scene, the very first crime scene. The only crime scene in the final cut that you guys see. In the script, I wrote it essentially the same way as you see it in the final film. Camera pulls out, bird's eye view, rotates around the corpse, and then the detectives walk in. For some reason, I decided to animate a short shot of Bill Kristol driving up in his police car, getting out and entering the building. It's an exterior shot of the Gatka building. You can see the crime scene tape that I was going to add in digitally, the text, crime scene, do not cross. Not sure why I animated that, because I didn't write that way in the script and it would have interrupted the flow of the scene, which is probably why I cut it. It's kind of a cool shot, but it really didn't have a place. It's really short, and as you can see, it didn't really add much. It's just an establishing shot.
Good morning, Doctor.
So you say.
About the accident. I'm really sorry about
Vic has been ID'd as a Katie McDougal. Still trying to reach relatives.
Who found the body?
A Dr. Gus Wilson. He's over there.
Now, the first big departure from the final cut that you guys are all familiar with and the original script is there were multiple murders after Katie's murder. The first of these additional murders, it was in scene 8, which I just called Murder in the Alley. Really creative. Basically, after Dr. Wilson's discussion with his friend Dr. Myers, where Dr. Myers is consoling him about Katie's death, there is another scene where Dr. Wilson remains seated at the coffee table, oblivious to the world around him. Time passes and many cameos can be seen. Zach, Nathan, Alex, Derek, blah blah blah. I was big on cameos even then, as you can see in the whole cafe. So kind of a time lapse, which you can see right now. I have a bunch of references to other Brick films, like The Hand of Fate. I still am, but I was really big on referencing other Brick films. Finally, it's dark out, and as I say here, the Starbricks waitress comes over to Dr. Wilson and tells him it's time to leave. So he leaves, and the one thing I regret is I really like this shot right here of him leaving. It was my first kind of attempt at dramatic lighting, and I thought it was cool. Kind of first hints of what I could pull off later on, many years later. So that's cut, and he continues on. I don't have any footage of this because as I was animating, I was realizing I was running out of time, and if I was going to fit the 10-minute time limit of the contest that I was entering, I had to cut shots a lot. So after I animated this, I realized I had to cut it down to one murder. So this whole sequence was cut. So I only have him sitting at the cafe, people wandering around him, and then him leaving. Now the scene continues that he essentially, Dr. Wilson walks along the sidewalk, he transforms into the beast again, hides in an alleyway, and then murders a businessman. All this was never shot. There is no footage of it. Does not exist. But essentially, after the businessman was murdered, there are two other CSI characters, Rick Strokes and Karen Woodson, which were cut entirely, though you can see them in the credits. They find the body. They say something, crime scene-ish, Rick, look at this, and you see a bloody paw print. And then we cut to a scene of a morgue, the classic morgue scene in any CSI episode where you see the naked body, except it's blurred out with a bright light or something. And Bill Kristol talks to the person who examines the body. Basically, this is just making Beast less like a Frankenstein tragedy and more like a CSI episode, which is kind of what I was going for. Basically, it just puts things around the time of death. What kind of animal could have caused these wounds? Something large enough to drag them off their feet, blah, 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 blah. It's kind of like one of those scenes that's required if you're making a crime scene in the mid-2000s, like a crime scene show or film or something like that. So that's the Murder in the Alley sequence that was cut, and you kind of saw, as I showed you guys, I still have like a few shots that I shot for that, but then eventually cut. So that was one thing that was cut.
Do they know how she died?
They think she was mauled to death. They think it might have been a pit bull, but they don't know how it got into my lab.
Yes. I must be off. Take care of yourself, Gus.
Now, the scene right after that, scene 10, Suspicions of a Coffee, was also cut. In fact, a huge chunk of the middle act was cut. I'd argue the entire middle act was cut. This one, Suspicions of Coffee, is very short. Dr. Wilson is at his regular table at the cafe, sipping his coffee, and he knows something's not right. He's having flashbacks of the attacks. He can hear growling, demonic howls, all that. Dr. Myers, his friend, comes in with a newspaper and says, "Gus, look at this. There's been another murder," pointing to the murder of the businessman in the alley. Dr. Wilson freaks out, runs out, and everyone's watching him. So this was one whole sequence that was shot, that the whole shot was shot. Sorry about that. That was my neighbors. The whole sequence was shot and then cut. And it's too bad, but it didn't really fit. I couldn't really have Dr. Myers talking about a second murder when I cut that second murder, so this sequence had to go as well. Pretty decent sequence, not much happens in it, but I do have footage, so here you go. So after Matt confronts Gus with the newspaper, not really confronts, but just kind of shows him the newspaper, and Gus runs out. Gus is in his house. This is another shot where he's in his house that I cut entirely. And he's in the fetal position, freaking out, and he realizes the sun is setting. And this is another aspect that I kind of cut out of the final film, is he only turns into the beast at night, kind of calling back to those werewolf legends of old. But anyway, he knows that the sun is setting. He gets out, he gets into his car, and he drives to his friend Matthew Myers, where he and his wife are setting the table, and they're discussing Gus, and they're worried about him. And then Gus himself bursts in, and Gus says, "Matt, you've got to help me," which is a line you can hear in the trailer, but was cut from the final film, clearly. I had the audio still at that point. I don't have any of the audio anymore. I only have like a few deleted scenes and the final render of the film. I don't know if I just deleted it or lost it over the years. I mean, it's been 10 years, so... Anyway, this line survived the trailer. Dr. Myers is really worried about his friend. Dr. Wilson is trying to explain, but he transforms into the beast after, he violently transforms into the Beast. Man, I've got just... This script is really bad, just so you guys know. You can check it out online. There's the spelling errors everywhere. It's not formatted properly. It's really pretty awful. Anyway, he transforms into the Beast. And again, none of this stuff was filmed. I knew I was going to cut it before I got to that point. So this is just all deleted stuff that you guys might find interesting, but has not ever been filmed and will never be filmed. So Dr. Myers tries to fend off the Beast with a fire poker. Madeline runs upstairs to call the police. And then the Beast rips out Dr. Myers' throat and then kills Mrs. Myers. So pretty brutal. I would have liked this to be in. I feel like it really upped the drama and the angst of Gus after he realized that he was the Beast. Because, I mean, yes, he killed his lab assistant and that's horrible. But in this one, he kills his best friend. And that... I feel like definitely the film could have benefited from this, but it just didn't. I didn't have enough time, and there's a time limit. There were so many factors that I had to. There were so many factors as to why I had to cut this. So, after the Beast, Dr. Wilson has killed his final two victims. We have another scene which is called CSI at the Myers. But first, we visit Bill Kristol at his desk. Examining photos of the crime scenes, and then a character called Shanna Saddle knocks and enters, and Bill looks up. I did actually film this, and you can actually see a very short bit of this in the Beast trailer. Essentially, it's just Shanna saying, cops called in, there's been another mauling, and then Kristol gets up and leaves. Again, following the pattern that you normally see in a standard CSI episode. So we see this, and I think the reason that he's looking at a spider is a nod to the original character from Crime Scene Investigation, who also likes spiders. I'm not sure. Anyway, that's what this scene is. It's pretty filler, but for some reason I filmed it before I realized I needed to cut it. After that, there's a whole scene, which I did not film, where they check out the bloody crime scene at the Myers house. They find Dr. Myers, they find the wife, they discuss who could have done this, and basically Bill starts to put it together. This is probably not the work of just a rabid animal. Again, this is all lost in the final film, which kind of sucks, because Bill Kristol doesn't do any real police work in the final film. He shows up, he asks a few questions, and then his lab assistant says, hey, look, the blood's human. And Bill Kristol's like, it must be Dr. Wilson. So it reduces his character to almost nothing. There was actually supposed to be some crime solving in here, even though it was very rudimentary. So I feel that it was lost, which is kind of unfortunate. The next scene you guys are all familiar with. It's called Bad Blood. It's the scene in the lab where Sandy McGregor, who looks suspiciously like Alex, which I've never quite figured out how to resolve. I'm thinking maybe twin brother? Who knows? Anyway, this scene is essentially intact. It's also got the terrible, terrible line of, what's got 2 legs, 2 arms, and 4,000 years of evolution to brag about. Hate that line. I can watch Beast and enjoy it for what it is, but whenever I get to that scene with that line, it's a terrible line. I don't know what I was thinking. It's poorly researched. I didn't think it through, and yet I don't know. Terrible. That's that scene. It's essentially the same. No changes there. And finally, we move on to what in the original script was called Scene 15, The Beast Within. This is fairly different because Dr. Wilson is at his house when the police show up in the original script. Bill Kristol visits him at his house, and he's already in beast mode, and the police chase him to Gatka, his laboratories, and then they chase the beast to the roof, and then the confrontation happens. So there was originally going to be a car chase of all things, featuring police cars and the beast, and it was going to be epic, and I clearly was not cut out to actually animate at that point. My skill level wasn't high enough. So I redid this where essentially they show up at Gatka. But before I really decide to cut this whole sequence and move it to the laboratory, from Dr. Wilson's house, I animated this shot of the police cars crashing into Gatka after they followed the beast going into the building. Definitely showed what I might be able to pull off with the skill I had back then, but yeah, this is the only footage that survived of this original sequence where they find the beast at Dr. Wilson's house and then chase it to the laboratory. This is definitely the weakest part of the film too, because it's evident that things were cut down. They kind of just walk into the building and you see the beast and it runs through the lab for a second and then we're up the stairs on top of the roof. There's just so much I cut, so much action I wrote. There was running and dodging and stuff crashing over, and as I said, car chases, all that cut. I mean, I don't think I could have done most of this back then, but it definitely left the finale lacking. Essentially everything else is the same. Dr. Wilson flashes back. After being shot, he transforms back into his former self, and then he says, "I'm so sorry," and falls onto a car. In the original script, I say he smashes into the Gatka sign and sparks fly. Not sure why I switched to a car, but I did. Fun fact, that blue car that Dr. Wilson falls onto is the same car that Alex has later in 5 years later. So yes, that was very intentional. You notice that Alex's car is a little more beat up than the original car. So just a fun thing that I like to put in there. Finally, there is a final scene called Epilogue. There is a huge extended sequence with the radio reporter talking about Gatka filing for bankruptcy. I cut that way down in post. Again, it's very lazy script writing. Don't do this, guys, where basically the news reporter wraps up the whole thing saying, and character X ended up here and character Y ended up here. Very lazy. Don't do it. There is a little bit of extended dialogue between Captain Copper and Bill Kristol, where I mention about, I go more into depth about the police officers witnessing the supernatural event and how basically they're going to be kept quiet with non-disclosure agreements and lots of money. Just cut that. I'm not sure why. And there's a few other sequences, but the final dialogue from Bill Kristol, where he's like, "I know I saw an animal one moment and a man the next, a man who looked like his soul had been ripped through. I saw a tortured man who, while reaching for fame, had infamy handed to him." The original script, Captain Copper then interrupts and says, "But the animal." And then Bill Kristol says, "That's what killed Dr. Wilson, not the fall, the beast within." And I guess when I was reading the lines, I felt it flowed better when I read it as one. So, yeah. Anyway, that's the whole shebang. Beast. Brickfilm, released 10 years ago. I hope you guys found that interesting. I will release the script online, both in its original format, like this, scan. You can see all my notes. I make a lot of notes about which things are going to be wide shots or 2 shots or medium close-ups. I have a few things like, okay, here's a part where I'm saying, should we cut that out? A few other random things, rewriting dialogue as I go along, numbering other shots. And then there's just random other notes. I think I was just writing using a scrap paper at some point. It's really beat up. So I'll have a version of this, and I'll also have a typed up version that's easier to read and you can search through it. And please keep in mind that you should not write a script like this. Look at this as an example of what not to do. Well, that brings us to the end of this very special video. I know some of you are hoping for a Beast director's cut. That is never, ever going to happen. Just going to be straight out and clear. There's no way I'm going to revisit Beast and film all the shots, all the scenes that I just talked about. I mean, you saw what I had. I only have a very few seconds of deleted footage, not enough to put into a film. Plus, the film is just, it's old. I'm not very happy with the script. It's a product of its time, and I feel like I'd rather focus on new projects than trying to revisit and basically George Lucas up my old films. So I hope you enjoyed this film. I hope to have more like it in the future. Got a new setup, more news, more stuff, more activity on my channel. I know it's been over a year since my last video. Hope to change that. I can hopefully have one video a month. We'll see if I can stick to that. I've made promises like that before in the past and have not stuck to them, so who knows. But anyway, till next time, thanks for watching.